Just to say, this morning we had very useful discussions on external relations. As I said earlier this morning, last evening we had a very sombre presentation, a worrying presentation by President Zelensky to the Council in respect of the nature of the war now on the people of Ukraine and the particular targeting of critical energy infrastructure, and about a third of the energy infrastructure has been destroyed. And also he referenced the mining of perhaps the biggest dam, certainly in Ukraine and if not Europe, being mined by the Russian army, with really dire catastrophic consequences if any explosions were to happen in relation to that dam, in terms of flooding up to 40 plus villages and the city of Kherson. So that all illustrates the war is taking a very, very horrible and horrific turn, we in Europe have to be very united in terms of our response to this war, which is illegal, it's immoral, and it's an attack on people and on civilians, and that is creating challenges across Europe, not least on the energy front, which we discussed last evening and which we thankfully came to conclusions on, but it's also weaponizing migration. As we can see all across Europe, countries are under a lot of pressure because of people both fleeing Ukraine and indeed other war-torn areas and areas of famine. And then this morning again we adopted conclusions in respect of facilitating vital agricultural foodstuffs to be transited out of Ukraine and indeed from Russia to Africa in particular, and to countries that need food urgently to try and stave off famine. So this war is having far-reaching impacts, not just on the continent of Europe but across the globe itself. We then had what I thought was very significant and strategic discussion on Europe's relationship with China. And the need to update and perhaps adopt a more strategic approach, which would mean that Europe becoming more self-reliant in relation to rare earth materials, in respect of technology, and also in terms of research and development and industrial development. The world is changing, and the earlier era of globalization is modifying. I don't think we're moving in any way towards a deglobalized world order, but we are looking at a more nuanced and more strategic approach to how Europe relates to not just its neighbours but strategic players globally. And so a lot of analysis of the Communist Party conference in China and how Europe should respond to that. There's a strong economic relationship. We need to be a partner with China in respect of the big challenges such as famine, such as climate change in particular, and also then mindful that we play by a certain set of rules in terms of the international order, and I think we can't be too naive in terms of our relationships with those who play by a different set of rules. And so it was very useful, insightful discussion on that involving all of the member states. And also there was a conclusion this morning in relation to Iran, condemning the human rights abuses perpetrated by the Iranian regime on the women of Iran. That was put in at the assistance of Ireland, and particularly a tribute to the Minister for European Affairs, Thomas Byrne, who inserted that clause at the GAC meeting to make sure that we would have a conclusion in respect of Iran, and expressing and articulating solidarity with Iranian women and the particular repression that they're currently under. So those were the main items that were covered. This morning there were additional measures, were preparations for COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is coming up in November, and then the relationship with Africa, which will be the subject of more detailed discussions later.
On migration, Minister O'Gorman said this morning on RT that migrants, maybe people seeking protection in Ireland, could be sleeping in the streets in the coming weeks. What's your reaction?
Well, that's something that we will do everything we possibly can to avoid and to prevent. What's happening in terms of the pressures we are experiencing is happening right across Europe. It's happening in Belgium, Holland, all the major countries across Europe because of the war. And this is what Putin wants. And I've no doubt that the latest episode of the war, which is focusing on civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, is designed to create a new wave of migration from Ukraine. It's an appalling, cynical, targeted strategy by Putin, which is creating misery for many, many Ukrainian citizens, their families, and so on. So Europe has to stay united and has to give a very clear message to Putin that this will not work. But that said, it does create challenges, and there will be a Cabinet Subcommittee meeting on Monday, which had been scheduled for some time, to have a full analysis of where we are now in terms of our accommodation capacity and in terms of measures and mechanisms that we can take to deal with the situation. Now, I want to pay tribute to all of the public servants involved who have worked very, very hard to deal with this situation, not just the Ukrainian situation, but also the increase in those seeking international protection, all of which stems from a more disrupted world order where we have drought and famine and wars across the globe, all leading to a general momentum in terms of migration, which is proving very challenging for Europe and for all member states of the European Union, and I think that has to be said.
On that matter though, back in September you indicated,
Sorry?
Back in September you indicated that households who are accommodating Ukrainian refugees, that 400 payment would increase. That hasn't happened. Are you going to look at that? Is it going to come in place to entice more households to take in Ukrainian refugees to help cover the cost with energy bills? And like as Pat said there, Roderic O'Gorman said that come December there could be a shortfall of 15,000 beds to accommodate refugees coming into Ireland. Surely the government is concerned about this. Are you doing everything, like churches, buildings that lay idle? Are you looking at those spaces to try and accommodate people?
I think we are doing everything we possibly can, and I think what has happened in the last 9 months has been quite unprecedented in respect of the numbers that have come into Ireland, particularly fleeing from Ukraine, up close now to 55,000. And 9,000 in terms of those seeking international protection, in addition to the 55,000 Ukrainians. But when you consider last year, I think we were close to 4,000 seeking international protection and no one from Ukraine in terms of fleeing a war. So that illustrates, since the commencement of the war earlier this year, I mean, that is an extraordinary response at one level by Ireland. And we have pulled out all the stops, and we will continue to work to pull out all of the stops. We're part of the European-wide Temporary Protection Directive, which not only involves accommodation, it involves the right to work and so forth. And this is across Europe, and it's a united European response to the worst humanitarian crisis on the continent of Europe since World War II. That's the context. And if you look at other countries on the border of Ukraine, multiples of the numbers we've received have entered those particular countries. And again, they are under very considerable strain as a result of this. So we will do everything we possibly can. In relation to measures, in fairness, the pledges had come in prior to any announcement of remuneration. So that's not the key measure, although we have brought it in, and it is under constant review in terms of the potential to increase and so on.
But there's rollback there then, because it was...
No, it's not a rollback. It's, as I say, it's under review.
Taoiseach,